You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
3CR is radical radio, and that means more than just alternative current affairs and political coverage.
We're radical because we're an independent media outlet, owned and operated by the community.
We're radical because we give communities the control of their own shows, with their own music, in their own languages.
We're radical because we provide a media platform for communities to build their own power to create social change.
Become a subscriber and support Radical Radio. Call us on 03 9419 8377 or subscribe online at 3cr.org.au/subscribe.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live streaming live on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. My name's Joseph Toscano, and if you're wondering what anarchy is all about, anarchos without rulers. You got any problems with the program? Give us a call. We'll have a chat. 0439 395 489. Don't expect me to answer the phone, but leave a message. I usually find that people who've got nasty things to say don't leave messages. All right, let's move on. Parliamentary democracy, dead in the water. Now, there's a lot of debate about what's going on in the USA and Europe and many other parliamentary democracies around the world. You see, parliamentary democracy is a little bit like a one-cell organism as far as democracy is concerned, because demos, the people, it basically means rule of the people, by the people, for the people, by an engaged public. That's a little add-on I like to put on. Rule of the people, by the people, for the people, by an engaged public, and that's the key. In many regards, parliamentary democracy can be summed up in the slogan, the greatest good for the greatest number. Simple concept. The greatest good for the greatest number. Now, although we like to think of ourselves as a liberal social democracy, parliamentary democracy, the fact is, for the last 50 years, and before that, obviously, we haven't had a system which supports that premise, that democracy is about the greatest good for the greatest number. Because what we've seen during the globalisation, corporatisation, deregulation and privatisation revolution, which has swept over the world, what we have seen is the concentration of power and wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And all you have to do is look at some basic statistics to see what's going on in the world today. It's simple. So as far as the mission, you like that? Mission statement of parliamentary democracy, the greatest good for the greatest number, it's failed miserably. And it's failed miserably because it's based on the concept of electing representatives to make decisions for a group of people for a fixed period of time. And in the majority of parliamentary democracies, you have to wait 3, 4, 5 years to cast a ballot once again to change that group of people. The dilemma is that in so-called postmodern parliamentary democracies, that's 2024, that power does not lie in Parliament. Parliament has enough power to make your life a misery. But in terms of creating an environment where you've got the greatest good for the greatest number, Parliament has lost that ability. Because the democratic system, or the parliamentary system, I won't use democracy and parliament at the same time, but the parliamentary system has been usurped by a small group of people who have the power and wealth to determine parliamentary policy. That's why every day in this country and most other places around the world we hear the same stories. We hear stories about people living in poverty. We hear stories about people being indebted up to their necks and having to work a lifetime to pay off, for a roof over their heads. We hear stories about people not being able to afford a roof over their heads. And at the same time, we hear stories about people having an extraordinary amount of wealth. And that wealth gives them the power to determine parliamentary policy. Now, on top of that, we still have a fourth of state in this country. And the fourth of state, theoretically, is out there to keep the bastards honest. That's the media, right? Now, the difference in 2024, say to 1854, when we talk about the Eureka Rebellion in Ballarat, is that for a population of 25,000 people, they had 4 independent newspapers. 4 independent newspapers, which played a leading role in that rebellion. Today, in 2024, whether you talk about virtual media and the various platforms in virtual media, which are all, in the majority of cases, privately owned or state-owned, what we see is the ability of individuals in small groups that own the fourth of state to skew debate regarding important issues and to continue to create the same social and cultural and political conditions which reinforce the power at that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange, and communication. So parliamentary democracy as a system is dead in the water because it has not been able to deliver the greatest good to the greatest number, irrespective of where it exists. So what we see around the world is people losing faith in that system because they can see that their lives don't change. Now, when you lose faith in a system that supposedly delivers the greatest good for the greatest number, what happens is that people start looking for alternatives. And that's why we see figures rise, usually with significant financial ability, figures arise who are able to use that disillusionment to mobilise a population by creating the illusion that their particular situation, the fact that that social elevator has been destroyed during the neoliberal changes, that their situation economically and socially and culturally is directly related to the other in society. Now, the other could be anybody. I mean, obviously, we've got Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. We have refugees. We have migrants. We have people who've, come here to this country, looking for the promised land. So it's very easy to mobilise people on the basis of the situation they find themselves in is directly related to the other in society. But when you look at it a little bit more closely, it's obvious, blatantly obvious, that the situation a significant proportion of the population finds themselves in is directly related to the power, both politically and economically, that a small section of society can use to reinforce its own economic position and power, and the power it is able to exercise. And that's very simple. For example, when we talk about people being on short-term contracts, we talk about unemployment, we talk about poverty, we talk about poor wages. What's happened during the globalisation, corporatisation, privatisation, deregulation revolution? What has happened is that all the cards have been put into the hands of that small section of society. So in order to increase profits, usually for major shareholders or individual owners, people export jobs overseas where they can pay people $1 or $2 a day, where there are no trade unions to cause them any issues. At the same time, we create a climate in society which basically says that it's not the fault of the aspiration or the billionaires, but the fault of the other. And somehow, if we get rid of the other, those jobs would come back to Australia, that we'd have permanency as far as employment is concerned. Well, obviously the facts, I know facts are very unpopular in 2024, the reality is totally different. So no wonder people lose faith in parliamentary democracy and are looking for alternatives. And these alternatives mainly revolve around marginalising groups of people who somehow don't fit into society, or who we think don't fit into society. It's not about a debate about who exercises power, who manipulates the parliamentary process, who profits from the legislative agenda, how wealth is created, how wealth is redistributed. These debates are non-existent. For example, there's always an issue of the day. Now, Mr. Albanese, bless his heart, has bought a $4.3 million house on a cliff. All right? Obviously, as Peter Dutton said, he's looking to the future. All right? He's looking to a comfortable retirement. Now, obviously, this is not a good look, right? But the dilemma is that many of the representatives we have in Parliament use this country's taxation-friendly laws to enhance their wealth at the expense of the population. So the debate is not just about, Prime Minister buying a house, which the media will focus on because it will increase pressure on the Labor Party and obviously assist Mr Dutton to become the next Prime Minister of Australia. The issue is, why do we find ourselves in this situation? Why don't we look at Mr Dutton's wealth or other parliamentarians' wealth? Or more importantly, why don't we look at the wealth of the billionaire class, which has arisen in this country courtesy of globalisation, privatisation, corporatisation and deregulation. Now, obviously, this is a little bit more difficult, but the fact is that reality and facts are no longer important in 2024. The age of reason has disappeared. Ethical behaviour is for losers. So the whole debate has its moulded, and in that term, whether it's in the virtual world or the legacy media, the whole debate revolves around peripheral issues, not the central issues. Who exercise power? How's the system manipulated to increase the profits of a shrinking minority? Why do so many people in the so-called land of milk and honey find themselves in such difficult situations? Why is employment for so many people so difficult to keep? Why is the legislative agenda always about increasing the power of those who obviously exercise power? Now, it's very easy for me to raise criticisms, and anybody can criticise anybody, all right? But the fact is, the Anarchist World this week is here to try to encourage people to look for alternatives. Now, an organisation I'm involved with is public interest before corporate interests, right? That's an organisation, pretty moribund, pretty marginalised, but at least that organisation is looking at the structural framework we find ourselves in and has made certain recommendations and is attempting to become a political force in this country. So the fact is, there are groups out there who look beyond the peripheral, beyond the everyday minutiae of existence, who actually, are not waiting for pie in the sky, but want to improve the situation for themselves and their families and their friends, and are interested in promoting the idea of the greatest good for the greatest number. Listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. Sometimes you've got to laugh. Now, I understand that that Rugby League, that's right, not AFL, but Rugby League is a big, big, big thing in Papua New Guinea. It's a little bit like AFL in Australia, okay? Big thing. And there are many Papua New Guinea players who now hold important positions in a number of rugby league clubs in Australia who are part of the National Rugby League, association, league, I should say, National Rugby League, whatever they call themselves. So Papua New Guinea has been agitating to have a Papua New Guinea team added to the National Rugby League team, all right? They want to play. They want to have their own little team to play. Now, the Australian government has realised how important rugby league is in terms of unifying Papua New Guinea a nation of almost 700 different languages in terms of creating some type of national consensus. So it is negotiating with the Papua New Guinea government to provide them with $600 million, and this is a country of 10 million people with extraordinary difficulties, as most of their resources have been sold off to the corporate sector for peanuts. They've followed the old Australian, adage. You find something, you get somebody else to develop and make all the profits. But there is a condition, and this is an interesting condition, because the Chinese government, or the People's Republic of China, has been wooing Pacific Island countries for a number of decades. And the best way it can woo them is basically by providing cheap finance to build infrastructure. Now, we all know the Solomon Islands has signed a security pact with the Chinese government, which allows the Solomon Islands government to call on Papua, to call on Chinese police if they need them in that country. And there are other security elements to that pact. And we did see the re-election of a government which is a strong Chinese focus. Now, we do know that Papua New Guinea, faced with extraordinary problems in terms of providing educations, basic health care, maintaining security, has been toying with the idea of signing a security pact with the Chinese government. Now, obviously, Australia, which has this phobia about China, is exceptionally concerned. So how do you think they're going to resolve this issue? And this is where, somehow truth is stranger than fiction. They are happy to give the Papua New Guinea government $600 million to develop a rugby league team to be incorporated with the National Rugby League, Australian National Rugby League Association. But on the undertaking, they will not sign a security agreement with the People's Republic of China. Now, I couldn't make this up. It's real. Look it up for yourself. Extraordinary. It'll be interesting whether the Papua New Guinea government is willing to give up the ability to acquire loans from China for the price of $600 million to fund a national Papua New Guinea rugby league team. You listen to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name is Joseph Toscano. I'm hosting today's programs. Well, ethics are for losers. Do you like that? You see, I think what people are beginning to understand is that in this country, and I'm only familiar with Australia, that in this country, that ethical behaviour gets you nowhere. Ethics are for losers. I mean, if you want to get ahead in Australian society, you need to be able to stab your neighbour figuratively in the back. People who live ethical lives find themselves at the end of their lives in debt, facing an old age penury. And that's the dilemma, isn't it? There's no reward, not that you expect reward for ethical behaviour, but you would think if people behave ethically during their life, they look after their neighbours, they volunteer, they do what they can to create a homogenous, peaceful, caring, horrible words, aren't they? Peaceful, caring society, that somehow they would be looked after in their old age. We now find ourselves in a situation where we have privatised old age. And if you still, obviously get bombarded by advertisements on the virtual world, if you still watch television, you get bombarded by advertisements. And there are two main advertisements at the minute: gambling, and obviously when people find themselves in a difficult economic situation, gambling increases because it looks like a way that you could somehow break out of that cycle of poverty. And advertisements for privately owned old age facilities. Because you see, the baby boomers, of which I'm one, are getting old. And we're not dying. Through medical intervention, although some of us may have chronic medical conditions, we continue to puff on. And because of superannuation, not all baby boomers have got superannuation, but because some have superannuation, what we've seen is the type of old age benefits that you can buy, right, is what ensures that you have a comfortable old age. So if you worked in a back-breaking job for a minimal wage for 40 to 50 years, and there is nothing in your and there's not enough in your superannuation fund to ensure you can get those comfortable beds and those wonderful swimming pools and that beautiful massage, which they advertise all the time, and that wonderful company, well then bad luck, Charlie. You find yourself in that situation. And there is a particular group which I find offensive, which talks about human rights, which talks about the fact, that 36% of people in old age facilities suffer abuse and that physical restraints are used. But guess what? Guess what, boys and girls? If you got the cash saved up because you had a lovely job and you had lots of superannuation, you can come and be part of our community. And we will give you the best send-off ever. Reminds me a little bit of like Soylent Green. Remember that little movie years ago, The poor got one day of bliss and then they were made into food flakes for the rest of the population. Extraordinary, isn't it? So, if you've been ethical all your life, you've done the right thing, you haven't, stabbed your neighbour in the back, you haven't tried to exploit other people, as we've seen many aspects of government, the type of old age you are going to face is going to be a very difficult one. A very difficult one. But if you had a wonderful job and you were involved in, let's say, some activities that somehow used other people's labour and exploited other people's labour, and you made a profit and you used this country's investment-friendly laws as far as, stocks and shares, negative gearing, you name it, capital gains, then guess what? You have the best old age money can buy. But there's one problem. If you're thinking that you're going to leave some to your kids, I can assure you these wonderful facilities, which do a lot of advertising, both on virtual platforms and in the legacy media, about how wonderful they are, will suck every dollar out of your virtual wallet. You listen to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Toscano and I'm hosting today's program. Well, Gaza, Lebanon, Israel, the carnage continues. Courtesy of the land of the brave and the free, the United States of America. Even the United States of America is getting a little bit concerned about the atrocities which are occurring in Gaza and Lebanon, especially in terms not of people being killed by the bombs they're providing to the Israeli Defence Forces, but because people have been starved to death. They've been denied water, food, medicines for over a year. Extraordinary. I'm sure if the Russians were doing this in the Ukraine, we'd have World War III. Then we've got the Israeli Defence Forces attacking the United Nations. Now let's not forget the United Nations peacekeeping force on the Israeli-Lebanon border has been there since 2006. And that a number of Australian soldiers are currently in those facilities. That's right. And here we have the Israeli Defence Forces telling the United Nations to get out of Lebanon. Now, look, I don't know much about boundaries, but to me Lebanon was a separate country to Israel. And the fact that Israel bombs Lebanon, to me that's war. But I've solved the problem. As I said, ethics are for losers, and we love to support war criminals and mass murderers, and child killers. I mean, that's the way we go. But I've solved the problem for you, because it's very easy to decide who's doing the wrong thing. Now, what I love about the United States of America is you can actually simplify things to their most basic. And any of you who've had the misfortune of seeing some United States-generated garbage as entertainment will notice that since, 2001, it's about good guys and bad guys. See, there's good guys, and that's us, and there's bad guys, that's them, all right? So I'm going to ask you some questions, and then you can decide who the good guys are and the bad guys are, okay? Who has forgotten about the Israeli hostages which are still held in Gaza a year after Hamas broke out of Gaza? Who bombs hospitals? Who levels whole suburbs? Who denies people access to basic medical care? Who bombs refugees in tents? Who imprisons over 2 million people for almost 20 years? I could go on. Who kills thousands of children? Who claims the moral high ground? Who is providing the ammunition, the drones, the missile, the guns to continue this carnage? Remember our little walk? As we walk past every Palestinian that's been killed in Gaza in the last year, it's a 42-kilometre walk, just as long as the marathon. Takes them, 2 hours and 14 minutes to do the marathon these days, or a bit less. How long would it take you to walk 42 kilometres where every third body is the body of a child. But that's a different story. You don't have to worry about that, do you? Because we live in the land of milk and honey. I could go on. So, if you don't know, if you haven't got a position on what's happening in the Middle East, what you need to remember is a few things. The Hamas atrocities which occurred on the 7th of October 2023 were not the beginning of that particular struggle. There is a 75-year history. And currently I'm doing a series on, political prisoners which were sent as convicts to Australia. And you can look at many of this series by going to josephtoscano.now. That's a YouTube channel. And the fascinating thing is I'm actually looking at the Irish rebels to a significant degree over that 300-year history. And how the atrocities which were committed against the Irish created the carnage in that particular part of the world. So in many regards, what happened as far as the Irish struggle is concerned, and continues to be concerned, is very similar to what's happening in the Middle East, especially in Israel and the West Bank, Gaza. You see, on that fateful day on the 7th of October, the Israeli Defence Forces were found wanting. Not only were they found wanting, Mossad, that wonderful Secret Service agency which seems to know where to bomb these days, didn't even have an inkling about what was to occur. You know why? They were too busy evicting Palestinians out of land they had owned for generations to create more illegal settler settlements. But a year on, we've forgotten all that, haven't we? The carnage continues. Even Israel's main ally, the United States of America, is losing patience with its pupil, stating that if they don't allow material to get into northern Gaza, they may stop armaments shipments, which I doubt very much, but at least people are beginning to understand that what Israel is capable and is doing is courtesy of us. That's right. You and me, courtesy of us. We're happy to accept it. We accept all the terminology. It's fascinating, isn't it? Well, it's not. It's disgusting, really, when you think about it. So good guys and bad guys. So think about it, all right? If you've still got an ethical bone in your body, think about good guys and bad guys. And when you see horrible things happen, think, is that what a good guy would do? Or is that what a bad guy would do? And that can give you some indication of where your loyalties lie. Let's move on. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation, 100 years on. Well, this week marks the 100th anniversary, I think, of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. I think it was, 1924. Now, I've been around for a particularly long time, not as long as most people, but some people, but, on the planet for over 70 years. And I've been a political activist since I was about 16, which, that means about 55 years of activism. And I've had various interactions with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation over the last, 50 plus years. And I have never found myself in a situation where the Australian Broadcasting Corporation has been so gutted. Those of you who were around the 1970s and the early 1980s would understand the Australian Broadcasting Corporation was at the forefront of the struggle for change and transformation. And that voices which you never hear today were allowed to be aired on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. But what we've seen over the last 20 to 30 years is the total destruction of the ability of staff on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation to provide independent analysis of situations. Independent. Listening to their coverage of the Israeli Gaza, Lebanon carnage, you would think there are only good guys and bad guys, and the good guys are the people who are doing the bad things. And when you hear an alternative voice, it's only heard occasionally. And to a significant degree, this has been done in three ways. And this is what people need to understand. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation Board is appointed by the government, the federal government of the day. And over the last 30 years, we've seen a watering down of the calibre of the people who are appointed the Australian Broadcasting Corporation Board. And this is a political manoeuvre to ensure that the type of analysis and news which comes out of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation is diluted to such an extent that it's almost irrelevant. Then you have middle management. Now, over the last 20 to 30 years, we have seen the appointment of middle management that to a significant degree are political appointments that have been appointed by various conservative reactionary governments to ensure that the content of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation in many regards mirrors the content of the privately owned media. Now, I'm not saying there aren't some brilliant current lifestyle events, programs in the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. Obviously there are. But the fact is that the organisation has been gutted. And the third thing, let's not forget, is that the introduction of short-term contracts has meant that ABC staff consistently looks over their shoulder. Because every few years, they've got to go through the exercise of trying to attempt to get a short-term contract. And if you haven't done the right thing, as we've seen with many ABC broadcasters who come and go, who've actually made some type of statement, then you are not offered another short-term contract. So there are many ways by which the Australian Broadcasting Corporation has been gelded. Appointments to the board, appointments to middle management, and the introduction of short-term contracts for most of its frontline staff. You listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name's Jeff Toscano. I'm hosting today's program. But when you turn on to the privately owned corporate media, it makes even a diluted Australian Broadcasting Corporation look like a giant among minnows. Lachlan, Daddy's boy. Oh, talk about garbage. Poor old Daddy. Poor old Daddy Murdoch's got a problem. He's old. All right? His mummy was over 100 and he's got good genes and he's in his mid-90s and he's old. He's got a lot of kiddies, but it's the 4 kiddies from his first wife which give him a lot of trouble because he made the mistake at some point in his little life as the empire expanded that the estate would be divided, the bulk of the estate would be divided, especially the media element to the estate would be divided amongst the 4 kiddies, right? So you know what it's like in a family. There's always that precious child, the favourite child. Now, Lachlan Murdoch has similar ideas to Daddy Murdoch. Fair enough. And we can see with the garbage which is produced by the shit they own, but that's a different story. That's my opinion. So, guess what? There is a secret court case in Nevada. They chose Nevada because these type of cases are not public. And we see the 4 kiddies fighting in the courts to ensure they get a quarter of that media empire. Well, Daddy, that's right, Daddy Murdoch is arguing that his nice son Lachlan should get the bulk of the estate because you know what he's concerned about? He's concerned about his legacy. That's right, a legacy of turning black into white and white into black. A legacy of misinformation, disinformation, and the creation of political buffoons who have a good chance of being elected in positions of extreme power. So he's concerned that if it's broken up, the empire, the kiddies break it up. All that work he did over so many years to ensure that the empire got bigger and bigger will somehow dissolve. Because you know the old story. The first generation, Rupert's daddy, in World War I, create the fortune. The second generation, that's Daddy's generations, Rupert's generation, consolidate and expand the fortune. And the third generation, destroy it. So I hope we'll see what the Nevada courts say about Daddy's attempts to break up an insoluble trust. It's fascinating, isn't it? Well, it isn't fascinating. It's pathetic, really. It's pathetic that we have allowed this family, this man, to dominate the parliamentary agenda for so long. And that's a dilemma. And this garbage continues. I've noticed recently the Australian, Murdoch's flagship in Australia, which has never made a profit, is now offering free virtual downloads of the stuff they write to the general population to ensure that they continue to have a stranglehold on the way people think in this country. And that's what it's about. It's about creating a climate which pushes people to think in a particular way, which ultimately reinforces the power and wealth of the Murdoch empire. So hopefully the other kiddies get their fair share. You listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Just in case you're involved in the public housing struggle, and the Victorian State Government has this brilliant idea that's going to demolish all these high-rise towers and then set up, all these, social housing which is privately owned. Well, 10%, So this Saturday, that's the 19th, this Saturday at 11:30 a.m, there'll be a gathering outside 120 Racecourse Road, Flemington. We have diverse people who are interested in public housing will be coming together at 11:30 to support the public housing tenants' foray into the Victorian courts to prevent the Victorian State Government from destroying homes they've been in for generations. So if you are interested in the public housing struggle, public housing everybody's business, and we've been holding a vigil outside the Victorian Parliament House every every Thursday between 12 and 1, which you're welcome to attend. You don't have to ring anybody up, just pop in and you can hold up a banner. We'll be there with lots of other people who are interested in the concept of public housing to throw our public support behind the tenants' struggle to have their apartments updated, not their whole lives destroyed through a demolition process. So the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. You see, when Victoria was under the leadership of Mr. Andrews, Daniel Andrews, they made a big splash about removing railway crossings and digging holes to expand the public transport network. But at the same time, they thought, the best way we can do this is by forgetting our responsibility to house people. And what we'll do, what's left of the public housing sector, we'll privatise it by stealth. We'll use fancy words like social, affordable, all that stuff, housing. I mean, public housing is publicly owned and publicly managed. Private housing, irrespective of it's for profit or not for profit, is privately owned and privately managed. There's a lot of differences which I've discussed on this program many times. So if you are interested in public housing, and the reason we created this organisation a few years ago called Public Housing Everybody's Business, because it's simple. See, economics is simple. There is nothing complex about economics, right? It's about supply and demand. If you increase the public housing sector by using Victoria's stamp duty revenue, which is applied when people buy a new house, to build public housing, you could actually spot purchase or build enough housing every year to house 100,000 Victorians in public housing every year. Simple, right? Simple. You increase the public housing stock, fewer people need to rent. Fewer people need to rent, more properties come on the market at the lower end of the market. First home buyers are able to buy these properties as their first home. At the same time, what happens is, because people in public housing only pay 25% of their income to be in public housing, what that means is there's an increased amount of disposable income, which people who don't earn much can then actually use to improve their lives. So it's a win-win situation. The creation of public housing is a win-win situation. The creation of holes in the ground may help some people, but it's no win-win situation. Now, I'm going to leave you with a little riddle. $24, $40, $2.50. What's it all about? $24, $40, $2.15. I think I made a mistake. $24, $40, $2.15. Well, the 24 non-performing economies on the planet, there's over 200 sovereign nation states, it's based on the sovereign nation state, have 40% of the world's population, which is about 8 billion these days. So what's that? That's about 3 billion. And these people live on $2.15 a day. Can't even buy a third of a cup of coffee today, can we, for that amount? Think about it. And who are the most indebted countries? These very same countries. We'll talk about it next week. The $24, $40, $2.15 equation. Thank you for listening to the Anarchist World This Week on your local community radio station. This program has been streaming live on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. You can listen in to the Anarchist World This Week on your local community radio station next week. Listen in next week. Any issues? 0439 395 489. Thank you once again for listening to the Anarchist World This Week on your local community radio
Evil
station.
minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World this week. Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to the Anarchist World this week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
Every Wednesday at 11 a.m, join me, Bunzelini, at The Fire on Community Radio 3CR. 3 hours of historically informed, critical analysis of Aboriginal affairs and the ongoing political movement for land rights, treaty, sovereignty and the cessation of genocide. Featuring the best of black music. Bunzel's Fire, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. every Wednesday on Community Radio 3CR.
3CR is about community, and we welcome your participation at the station.
3CR is open to a wide diversity of volunteers and is a great way to connect with Melbourne's activist community.
Have you ever thought about volunteering, doing a reception shift, getting a program on air?
Training in radio skills or contributing to one of the station's committees.
There are many ways to be involved at 3CR.
To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au and get in touch.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.